I mean, honestly, I think it is really incumbent upon the SSPs to clean that up.
So who do you think is responsible for cleaning the mess up? Brands, agencies, or tech platforms?
So I was on a panel a couple of years ago, and I won't mention names again, but we were having a similar discussion. It's just like, how do we solve this problem?
You can't say all of us unless you're going to hand out the chores.
I mean, honestly, I think it is really incumbent upon the SSPs to clean that up. That's my view. I think if you're an SSP, you're creating a product. So, we would never say to our clients, come buy stuff from us, and watch out, we do have some really, really low quality stuff that we might accidentally offer you, so you've got to be careful. Of course, clients would never accept that from us, and I don't think buyers should accept that from SSPs. It's your product. You're the ones who are signing up these publishers. You're the ones who are deciding what inventory comes into your platform. So have higher
Scott Ensign is the kind of guy who thinks fewer impressions could actually make media better, which is basically heresy in ad land. He's Butler Till's Chief Strategy Officer, indie agency evangelist, and possibly the only person who can say curated PMP without putting me to sleep.
Multi-billion-dollar complex federal court litigation. We do it day in, day out. And we've built a team dedicated to doing nothing but keeping you safe in the most dangerous litigation in the world. We're comfortable where everybody else is horribly uncomfortable.
And with the litigation piece, we bring the compliance piece, right? That's what I'm adding, that's what my entire team is adding. We've built TCPA World only for you folks to help you folks out.
I am Pesach Lattin, host of the ADOTAT show where we cut through the ad tech BS with a blowtorch and a sense of humor. Today's guest, Scott Ensign, the Chief Strategy Officer of Butler Till, a man who believes media isn't a commodity, programmatic can be fixed, and that fewer impressions might actually be a good thing. We're not here for the canned answers, we're here to shop top, swap war stories, and maybe cause a little trouble. First of all, how are you doing, and are you feeling as smug as you should watching indie agencies steal lunch money from the big holding companies?
Hi, thanks for having me. I am feeling great. I don't know if smug is the right word, but I will say that I feel very good about being part of the independent agency community as always, but perhaps now more than ever.
So what do you mean when you say, though, it's a great time to be an indie? I assume you don't mean indie rock. You're not like Weezer sitting there with a guitar on your knees.
I do mean indie agency in this case, yes, although I have been known to play a little guitar once in a while. I just think our business model works for a more progressive, modern-minded client and consumer. So the holdco model, I'm not saying it's wrong or bad. I just think there's a lot of clients out there for whom the independent model works better for a lot of reasons. Mostly flexibility, speed to market, the ability to innovate on customized solutions, things like that.
So can you give me a David versus Goliath client story? One where you walked in, blew the dust from a bloated media plan, and made the client question their entire life.
I can, and I have a recent one, although I know you don't shy away from being provocative, but I am not going to mention names. There's a recent pharma win, where we came in. It's a client with media budgets approaching and potentially above the 9-figure mark, so a really large client. We were essentially up against an incumbent holdco, and taking a look around what they were doing on the media side, it was clear that there were a lot of things there that they weren't paying attention to in the way that we would. And so some of those are even simple things like paid search, like being in the right places for paid search, running those campaigns appropriately, looking more, I think, thoughtfully at what we're doing on the media plan and things like TV and even CTV. We were able to remix that pretty quickly, tell a really compelling story. And, Butler Till, we're, hundreds of people, hundreds of millions of dollars in media spend up against a lot of times agencies that are thousands, tens of thousands of people and billions, tens of billions of dollars in media spend. And we've done really well in terms of telling a really compelling story, even with, as you said, a very much a David and Goliath situation in many cases.
So what do you...
If last touch attribution worked, your waiter would take full credit for your meal. We make sure the chef gets credit too. Incremental.
So what do you think the biggest myth is that clients believe about the value of big holding companies?
Well, I mean, I don't know if I would call it a myth, but I definitely think that the holding company model has been built in many cases on the concept of buying power and arbitrage, and that bigger is better. So I would say if I had to find a myth, it would say that bigger is always better. And I'm not saying that bigger is never better, and I'm not saying that it's wrong for everyone, but the idea of buying power is just, it's not as important as it used to be. Things like upfronts are not hardly important at all in most cases, and certainly not what they were. I mean, we can buy media, we don't have to commit to a year, we can buy for 10 minutes if we want to. And the best, we've been talking a lot lately about, the best media plans are the ones that you rip up 1 week once you're into a campaign, because circumstances are going to change. I mean, look at what's happening in the world these days. Things are not exactly static, and neither should media plans be. So I think that's, again, where bigger is not always better. Small, nimble, able to adapt to circumstances. And there's a lot about Butler Till that I think works really well for the right client that larger public companies just aren't able to deliver on.
So what's the trade-off, however, being independent that nobody warned you about?
Well, I mean, I think we still do compete on rates sometimes and buying power. And if there's a particular client situation where a rate with a larger publisher is really important, that can be sometimes a challenging conversation for us. I think, scale is important to a lot of brands too, in ways that we strategically have decided not to be involved in. So for instance, Butler Till, today anyway, the future, who knows about the future, but today we're a completely domestic agency, completely US-based business. Just decided this is such a huge market, there's so much opportunity here for us, it doesn't make sense to spread ourselves thin internationally. Those are all things that, again, I don't even know if I would say it's working against us, it's just some clients are not a fit, and that allows us to really focus in on the right client profile for us.
So let's fast forward 5 years. Do you think indie agencies will take over the world, or will the empire strike back?
I think in 5 years the landscape will be not completely dissimilar from what it is today. I don't think holding companies are going anywhere, or larger public agencies, or even, there's a big gap. People talk about independence and sometimes talk about Horizon Media and Butler Till in the same breath, but there's a lot of difference in size and scale even in those things. So like I said before, I think there will continue to be a need for agencies and players of the same size. I'm very much not a zero-sum game type of person. Like, the market is growing, media spend is growing overall, even if there are some moments of pullback, and I think there's going to be room for players of all sizes with all different ways of approaching the market.
So you've also been on a bit of a crusade to redeem programmatic curation. What's your elevator pitch to marketers who think that PMP stands for probably more problems?
I love this question, and I love the concept of curation. So it seems like in our industry we go through these cycles of people get really excited about something like curation, people start to use it, new companies and providers pop up, and then there's a group of people who seem to make a living coming in and saying, like, this is garbage, you shouldn't be doing this, or this is just what you should have been doing all along, or there's some reason why it's not good, why it's a bad thing, as if things are either good or bad and there's no shades of gray in the world. So curation is a great example of that. And some people have a point. Some form of if you're talking about curation, just like selecting what media you want to run on programmatically, yeah, that does feel a lot just like what an agency, especially a media planner agency, should have been doing all along. But for us, we talk about really purpose-fueled curation, and there's a few different dimensions to that. It's really solving a problem. And if the output of what we're doing on the curation side solves a problem, then that's great. Like, whether we want to call it curation or call it something else, there's been a lot of talk too about, like, we need to define curation, we need to nail it down and give it a specific definition. Like, I'm not particularly concerned about that either. But when I think about curation, so a couple of examples. Butler Till we're an employee-owned company, we're women-owned and led company, we're 100% employee-owned through an ESOP. So every employee here is an owner, every owner is an employee, we're a certified B Corporation. So there's a lot of values behind what we do that are very unique to us. So the people here and the clients we work with tend to really care about the impact of what we're doing on the world. One of the things that we've wanted to do is to spend programmatic dollars in a way that reflects that. And so we made a commitment a few years ago to spending 10% of programmatic dollars within purpose-driven marketplaces. So those are other employee-owned companies, other B Corps, minority-owned, women-owned, other underrepresented groups. And it turns out that inventory it's pretty hard to find. Like there's not a specific repository of that. There are some players that help with us, but so we've worked with partners, Audigent, who I know you know well and have had Drew Stein on the show before. They've really come alongside us and helped us find that inventory and put it into a private marketplace that allows us to meet that commitment. So that's one area where like the purpose-fueled part of curation helps us. Another example, we deal with a lot of health and pharma companies, and those clients really gravitate towards contextual, like high quality contextual endemic inventory, like your WebMDs, your Healthlines, and that's great. We buy that on behalf of our clients. We have great partnerships over there. But those direct buys, they're built on a little bit of a scarcity model. So if you want to buy into one of those big endemic sites and take over one of their conditions pages, like there's only so much of that inventory that you can buy. It tends to be expensive. High value, but expensive. And so we've used curation, and we call this our conditions marketplace, to create a programmatic marketplace environment that is learning from, it's seeded with all of the high performing inventory to go find similar contextual inventory out there. And we've put that together so we can now combine the power of programmatic, it's addressable, it's measurable, it's flexible, along with the high quality of those endemic environments. And we've seen really, really good, we won an Ad Exchanger award last year for that work. I think those are just a couple of examples of where curation, it can work really well if there's a problem that you're trying to solve. Like a lot of people have talked about it being a solution in search of a problem, and we really do approach it from the opposite way.
So when we talk about purpose, are we talking ESG, campaign goals, or just making sure you're not buying pet foods on a true crime podcast?
I mean, I think all of the above, really. So I mean, we've used it for those ESG things that I had mentioned too, in terms, we call that our purpose-driven supply initiative. And then when we have a specific client need or goal, we can really point the power of curation toward that too. I mean, I think that's what's so much fun about programmatic. There's no right or wrong way to do things. I mean, there are some wrong ways to do it, of course, but there's no one way to get things done in this space. And it allows for so much innovation as a buying modality, not just being a channel too, of course, right? If we want to do CTV or online video or audio or a combination of those that all kind of feel the same, like we have so many options to build and innovate and create for our clients, which is a lot of fun.
So if curation were a person, how would you describe its personality right now? A misunderstood genius or a washed-up rock star trying to make a comeback?
Well, if those are my two choices, I would say misunderstood genius for sure. Because I think there's a lot of brilliant things that you can do, and it seems like not everybody is clued into that. And it's hard. There's so much going on in our space, and the shorthand for curation is just kind of like putting some inventory together in a PMP, which doesn't really equal a very compelling concept. And so if you're just kind of skimming over the headlines, you might be like, well, that just kind of sounds like media buying, when in fact it combines a whole lot of things between inventory and data and audience targeting. And then, of course, a real heuristic machine learning approach. Like there's just so much that you can do with it that I think on the surface it might look kind of ordinary and plain, but it's really complex when you get into it.
So now that we curated the hell of our ad buys, let's get a little dirty. What is really going on in the supply chain? You've spoken a lot and you've written a lot about the programmatic mess, particularly the need for radical transparency and buyer site accountability.
Yeah.
So here's my question. I'll do this one. If the programmatic supply chain were a mafia movie, who's the consigliere and who's the bagman and who's getting whacked in the third act? Because from where I sit, it feels like everyone's pointing fingers and nobody's admitting their laundry and dirty impressions through 7 layers of plausible deniability.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think who's getting whacked is anyone who's really serving primarily just as an intermediary in the space. And I think over the last few years, I've been very pleasantly...
And what do you mean by intermediate? What do you mean by that?
Yeah, I mean, if you're reselling inventory and there's really no value being added from one place to another, I think those are the things that are getting cut out. We've seen some consolidation on the SSP side. I mean, we work directly with, single-digit handful of SSPs. Not to say we won't buy from others where we need to, but you can find all of the inventory you need within a relatively small number of supply-side platforms. And that's really really the approach that we've taken. And then there's an ongoing evaluation of the ones we're working with. Are they the right ones? Are they providing us the level of not just commercials? That's important for us and for our clients, of course, but more than that, the right quality and solutions. And I have to say, I'm very impressed, especially lately. The supply side of the equation have really come to the table. They've upped their game in terms of buyer development and bringing solutions and products that agencies and ultimately clients care about. So I think you're going to see a lot more of that, a lot more decisioning on the sell side, which is not to say DSPs aren't important and will continue to serve a purpose, but I think you are seeing some shift of what's happening from a data and algorithmic sense in terms of what we're buying, shifting from sell to buy side, which I think there's a lot of room for, honestly.
So can you give me a real moment you smelled something fishy in the supply chain, and what did you do about it?
Sure. I mean, we've come a long way. This was going back a couple years in the space, MFAs, made for advertising sites, were all the rage. And much like our conversation around curation, there is a variety of opinions on what constitutes an MFA, or what is good, what is bad, what is acceptable. And for us, it's really about what would we want our brands to be associated with. And so, we've seen a lot of inventory that is it's not necessarily fraudulent, but for a large client of ours, we've been partnering with Jounce for a while, and Chris Kane over there to really create a
repository. We just had him on last week.
Yeah, great guy.
Yeah, we spoke a lot about, the change in MFAs and how it's gone away. And one of the interesting things he said, and I brought this up, is he says he doesn't think the publishers were ever, he says he regrets making them into villains.
Yeah, well, and I think that's really interesting, because it's all about incentives. And so I've compared, and this is maybe a little extreme, but I've compared that whole situation to the war on drugs a little bit. It's if you don't address what's going on the demand side, supply is going to be there as long as there's demand. And I give Chris a lot of credit.
Yeah, the biggest problem on the war on drugs is Americans. They're the ones who are buying the drugs.
Exactly. I mean, if there's a market for something, supply is going to get there one way or another. I mean, it's going to find its way there. And that's exactly what happened with really, really low quality inventory. And I think we really have turned a corner on that. I've got to give Chris Kane and Jounce a lot of credit for highlighting that issue, for being at the forefront, for providing meaningful tools and definitions around how to do it. But, we had a large client where we started to measure that a lot more closely, and there was, 19% in some cases of what I would consider MFA inventory. Again, it's not fraud, but it's just not exactly what you would want your brands associated with. So we've been working very hard to clean that up. We've combined the data from Jounce with our own mix of performance data and metrics to create, some really, really high standard filters that we apply to all of our campaigns to make sure that we're only, if we are doing, I would say 70-ish% of our programmatic spend is through deals now, but where we are doing open exchange to make sure that we have really, really tight guide rails on all of that.
So who do you think is responsible for cleaning the mess up? Brands, agencies, or tech platforms?
Such a great question too. So I was on a panel a couple of years ago, and I won't mention names again, but we were having a similar discussion. It's just how do we solve this problem?
You can't say all of us unless you're going to hand out the chores.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, honestly, I think it is really incumbent upon the SSPs to clean that up. That's my view. And we work with a lot of them who have done really, really good work. Index Exchange, for example, Andrew Casali over there has taken a pretty...
I just spoke to Andrew 2 days ago about this.
Okay.
He's also...
Yeah, he's very passionate about it. Great. Another... I think, great guy and a leader in this effort and this space that I look up to. But I think if you're an SSP, you're creating a product. So, we would never say to our clients, come buy stuff from us. And watch out, we do have some really, really low quality stuff that we might accidentally offer you. So you got to be careful. Of course, the clients would never accept that from us. And I don't think buyers should accept that from SSPs. That's your product. You're the ones who are signing up these publishers. You're the ones who are deciding what inventory comes into your platform. So have higher standards. And we definitely have seen that happening. Going back to what I said though, I think to be fair to those SSPs, there is a demand for cheap reach. There still is a demand for cheap reach. You see that in things like frankly, holdco outcome groups where there's a transparently non-transparent aspect to what they're offering. And so if I'm an SSP, it's like, well, there's a demand for this, and if I don't offer it, I'm going to lose market share, I'm going to lose revenue. So that's where the incentives come in too. Like, we've got to collectively break any addiction that still remains to just cheap, low quality reach.
So what's the one hill you're willing to die on when it comes to fixing quality problems? And this is a multiple choice. A, ban flat CPM buys. B, mandatory log level access for clients. C, public inventory accountability audits. Or D, make all buyers pass a programmatic polygraph test.
I like all of those to one degree or another. I would say log level data access is, to me, just an absolute minimum. So, one thing that we work on with all of our suppliers is, I was just having this conversation today with the team. If a client absolutely wants to buy something, even if it doesn't meet our standards, as long as there's not some kind of moral or ethical issue why we wouldn't buy it, we're going to buy it. But if we're talking about the partners that we choose to work with, there's some just very, very basic table stakes. And the number one table stake for me is transparency. We're we call ourselves marketers who specialize in media, and we do stuff beyond media, but at our core, Butler Till for the last 27 years has been a media agency. And the prime directive for a media agency is stewardship and knowing what you're buying on behalf of your clients. So to me, that transparency is just log level data form is absolute table stakes. I think that's the one thing that I would not let go of in that group.
So this is the next part. This is my favorite part. It's where we get hypothetical, hilarious, and a touch absurd. I'm going to put you on a desert island. You get to bring 5 people. You picked your 3 kids, your girlfriend, and Steven Pinker, who I believe wrote a book about the mind, right? 2 of them. Is that the one?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I make sure. Yeah. So I remember he wrote one like 2000. One came out recently, right? Like a couple of years ago.
Yeah, he's the one, probably my favorite book of him is called Enlightenment Now. And it's really just kind of a case for a new age of reason, I would say. And I actually had a chance to meet Steven Pinker at an event a few years ago.
That's exciting.
Yeah,
I remember my favorite part of his book, I think, was his original book. He wrote about Freud's barf up the baby syndrome, where he believed that. At the beginning of the book, like in 1998 when it came out, I think, he wrote how Freud believed that women wanted to throw up their babies subconsciously, and that's why they had morning sickness.
That's interesting.
He pointed out how psychology isn't always, it's sometimes pop psychology, I guess.
Yeah, not always intuitive, I suppose.
He pointed out what it was is that it actually turns out studies show that the women that have higher rates of pregnancy illness have less miscarriages and less poisons in their system from different plants and stuff like that.
Interesting. Yeah, I just love the way that he thinks about the world, and I love the idea of being able to have conversations in a somewhat dispassionate way. I think there's a lack, not just in our industry, but certainly in our world, of being able to have a discussion where you can have a free exploration of ideas without, either just sticking to your initial set of beliefs or getting upset with the other person. Like, it seems to be a lost art.
So what's the first brand you try to invent or sell to your fellow castaways?
I'm sorry, the first what?
Brand you try to invent or sell to your castaways, your crew of castaways. Like a coconut VPN?
Well, I think if we were stuck on a desert island, I would definitely try to invent some kind of internet service provider. I think that would be the most valuable thing. It's like, how can we get information onto the island, assuming that
multiple choice again. What's the one industry term or trend you'd happily throw into the ocean, never hear again? A, full funnel. B, data-driven storytelling. C, cookieless future. Or D, retail media is the new black.
I would happily throw away all of those, for the record.
I'm not even sure what a full funnel is anymore.
I think cookieless future I would get rid of right now. It just seems so incredibly passé. I am so tired of having any conversation about cookies. It's been going on, as you know, for like 8 years, and I would happily never have to say or hear that again.
If you were rescued tomorrow, what would you not want to return to in the ad industry?
I think the upfronts. I am not going this year. We're sending people. I just think that modality of buying is so...
It's egotistical, I think.
Yeah, and it just doesn't make sense anymore. And there's so many things in the media world that we hold on to because of the way that interests are aligned and incentives, the way that people are used to doing things. because they want to have a good answer for their boss when they get asked a question about something. I just think that there's so many better ways to do things than upfront annual media buys that I would happily not have.
So now that we tested your survival instincts, let's talk about what makes you tick. No jargon, no dashboards, just raw human curiosity, and maybe a question about breakfast here.
Okay.
Yeah, this is why I have editing and pauses.
Yeah, all good.
You've mentioned Ken Dobell as your Yoda. What did he teach you that you still use every day, like some strategic Jedi mind trick?
Yeah, so Ken's a fascinating guy, which this is reminding me I need to catch up with him sometime soon. I worked with him when I was very young, and he was the president of the digital part of an agency that I used to work at. Really fascinating guy. His background is from the kind of early days of Monster.com and early internet vibes, for those of us who remember. As a young account person on the digital media side, I was very wide-eyed and scared of a lot of the things that were going on in the industry because there was a lot of uncertainty. There continues to be a lot of uncertainty. And Ken had this way of talking about things that we didn't necessarily know how we were going to accomplish or what the future was going to hold, but with great confidence. And I remember coming out of meetings sometimes saying, like, how are we actually going to do that? But I definitely learned from him to really kind of live in the future a little bit and live on the edge of what was possible today and to become comfortable in that. And that's something that has continued to serve me in my career and something that literally, like you said, I do every day.
So you said your craziest opinion, and I actually agree with this, is that ad impressions will decrease, and that's actually good. Can you unpack that for us?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's more than good. I think it's necessary and great. So right now, you probably, like the rest of us, are hearing in the news about the potential for a ban on pharma ads on TV. And so that's highly relevant to many of our clients because we do quite a bit in pharma. It's an area of focus and expertise for us. And I think part of the problem with that is that pharma brands, if you watch linear TV, you will see kind of pharma ad after pharma ad after pharma ad. And if you think about advertising waste, just like any other kind of waste, there are byproducts of waste. And I think one of the byproducts of advertising waste is consumer distrust, acrimony towards advertising. And really that's manifesting itself right now in some policies. Somebody like RFK Jr. is probably watching a lot of linear TV. He's in the age cohort of people who watch a lot of linear TV at 71, 72 years old. And he's probably seeing all of these irrelevant pharma ads, untargeted, and that's driving policy decisions. And so I think that's kind of a macro example of what's happening over and over again. Like, if we're going to have meaningful value exchanges with consumers saying, like, you can have access to this content, but there's some advertising that we want to expose you to as a result, we've got to be responsible with those value exchanges. We cannot bombard them with irrelevant things, and we can't chase the cheap solutions to that. So I do think there's a future. Ads are going to continue to get more targeted. They're going to continue to be more permission-based. Therefore, they will be more valuable. And yes, on a per unit basis, they will ultimately be more expensive. But the result is consumers will be exposed to fewer messages that are far more relevant and valuable to them. And I do think trend-wise, that's where we're going.
So let's play therapist a little bit. What do you think you need to get better at?
I don't even have to think about that one. I really struggle.
You couldn't hold it in.
I really struggle with patience. In fact, you see on the wall behind me is a constant reminder for me. And a lot of us on the leadership team here at Butler Till have this on our wall. It's like we need to move in ways that are bringing everyone along. I am just incredibly impatient for the future, and I think that's one of the things that has served me well in my role, especially working on the strategy side of things. But there's another side to every coin, and for me that means I need to remind myself that there's some things are the way they are for a reason, and some things are going to take a while to change, and there's a lot of work that has to be done in bringing all of the people around you along with you on that change.
So what's one thing your team would say about you when you're not in the room?
The one thing that they would, so is this the thing I want them to say about me?
Well, that's the second question. What do they say, and what would you want them to say?
I think I have a reputation for being kind of one of the more direct people at the agency, that, I say what I mean and that don't necessarily sugarcoat things. So I think that definitely is something that people would say about me. Hopefully they appreciate it, at least to a certain extent.
Last but not least, we got through this really fast. When people Google you in 5 years, what do you want them to find, and what headline would make you throw your phone into the nearest lake?
I really would like them to find that, we've led Butler Till to continued growth, and in 5 years, hopefully I'll still be here and still be working, but that they're seeing that, I've been a part of the strategy that has allowed us to continue on our growth trajectory. So in 5 years, that means more than doubling in size again. And to me, that's not about us making a pile more money, although obviously we have to make money to continue to grow. But, I really legitimately, and this sounds a little bit corny, but I believe that we have found a better way of working. I really love the fact that we're an employee-owned company. I love the fact that our people are bought into this idea of not only employee ownership, but of being a B corporation and using business as a force for good, and doing things the right way. And I want to see that continue to grow. So that's something that I'm hoping in another 5 years that growth trajectory will continue, and I'll still have the privilege of being associated with it.
Now we have the hard part, which is we try to make you to dance.
Stop that.
And that's a wrap on this week's ADOTAT show, where Scott Ensign reminded us that being indie doesn't mean small. It means smart, fast, and just a little dangerous. Big thanks to Scott for bringing the receipts, the real talk, and the curation therapy session we didn't know we needed. Massive shout out to our sponsors, Troutman and me, the legal guardians of common sense in ad tech, and incremental.com, proving every week that incrementality isn't just a buzzword, it's a full-blown superpower when done right. Until next time, don't buy into the hype, demand your log files, and if someone says retail media is the new black, kindly escort them to the nearest exit. Stay bold, stay curious, and know more than you did yesterday.